Chapter 4662. More than 100 Jinghong Tianjiao screened from the ancient Shinkong Road have been left in the Yunxiao Palace, and have become one of Tianjiao Supreme after tens of thousands of years. The futon of the eternal God heard that they did not wait, because from the mouth of the red-haired white child, I learned that eternal God was still asleep, and I wondered when to wake up. But their goal is no longer the qualification of the futon to hear, but the more desirable seat of disciples. Established by eternal God, the more demanding path of heaven is the only way to obtain the seat of eternal God disciple. On the way to the gate of that day, we can see the existence of the true peak of the divine universe. Legends, on the way to that gate, the true shadow beyond the invincible supremacy remains, even if you step into it and practice, it is also supreme. Countless monks yearning for it, want to stand out from the starry sky ancient road, and step into the path of heaven. Natural competition is far more intense than the starry sky ancient road. Everything is new. Yunxiao Palace, Tianyantai. Straight into the top of the cloud, the exquisite dojo, the old venerable, Bloodwave Supreme, Nine Robbery King, Fengqi, Longyang Longkai and others all gathered to sit and taste tea and view the cloud. And the sword Wushuang, who was still asleep, at the same time, he was sitting on the stage and secretly drinking tea. It's still so comfortable. It's much more comfortable to sit and watch tea with some old friends than preaching. Jian Wushuang Yuzai said. Everyone smiled. Fengqi said with a lip, "You have been drinking this tea for more than 100,000 years, and you still don't get tired of it." Jian Wushuang smiled and took another sip, of course not greasy, but this tea is a good baby taken from the chaotic tea tree of the palm Jian Zhenzong, which is especially good for the spleen and stomach. After hearing this explanation, the tea in the mouth almost spewed out. This guy who has already stood at the top of the universe, and even heavenly path is under his control, actually wants to drink tea to protect his spleen and stomach. But thinking about it for a while, eternal God likes to drink tea and finds a hobby in the boring days. After tasting tea for more than 10 years, Jian Wushuang was right. Everyone, in the next period of time, everything in the Yunxiao Palace will come to you first. Put down the teacup, and the Bloodwave Supreme asked, "Master Ju, are you ready? Prepare to go to the heavens to find the mud tire that disappeared in Kangwutai." Jian Wushuang said. Fengqi hurriedly said, "But this has already passed 100,000 years, and there is no sign of that thing. Will it die?" Jian Wushuang shook his head. "It is precisely because of this that I am a little uneasy. If you let it continue to grow, the consequences will be unbearable. I don't want to let the divine universe go into turmoil again." Fengqi's lips were tight, and she obviously knew the importance of things. After all, the mud tire of Qi Ting is really weird, and it is made up of the blood of nearly 10 million monks. Although the mud tire was not as good as Jian Wushuang millions of years ago, it is indeed an ancestor. If you let it grow up all the time, the consequences will be unimaginable. "I will go with you." Waiting for Fengqi to speak, there has been little speech, but the very serious Zhou Wang said. Today's king of nine tribulation, which had been enlightened by the fall of the earth god a million years ago, has already broken through that layer of shackles and reached the terrible half-ancestor level. His sharpness. Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows and patted his shoulder with a smile. "Good brother, although I also want you to go with me, but the experience of the journey to the heavenly gate can no longer be separated from you. You help guard there, also helped me." "Here is the elder guard of the giant axe," said King Zhoujia. The great axe supreme shook his head again and again. "I don't go, my body is old, I need to rest more and rest before I can continue the battle with eternal God. You, let me check the Tianmen more for me. I and the old Zun will go to a quick decision, and I will come back soon." Jian Wushuang smiled and embraced the Nine Tribulation King. "Okay, you must come back within a million years, and then the monks on the way to Tianmen should also come out," Wang Ju said. Jian Wushuang nodded with a smile. "Come, drink for another year, and I will start again after a year." 1 year later, from the Yunxiao Palace above the cloud top, 2 figures walked out to the world of the heavens. "Laro Zun, I want to ask you something." Among the clouds, Jian Wushuang dressed as a ranger looked at Laro Zun beside him. "I know what you want to ask, all the news about that mud tire. Compared with millions of years ago, the kind of stranger's breath on the old man has almost disappeared. At this time, He is like a sect. Like the elders who doze off in China, there is a little more peace. Jian Wushuang nodded. I still don't quite understand why the Chiting, who has reached the top, should do that. That's because he has reached the time when he has to do that. Lao Zun looked far away and said quietly, his strength and realm have reached a point where they can't hide, far beyond the ancestor level. Yu reading book www.ukanshu.com. What? Beyond the ancestor level? Jian Wushuang horrified, but the culmination of the universe is not only the ancestor level. Since the top of the universe is an ancestor, what am I? Lao Zun calmly said, and he who has realized from the eyes of chaos spring should naturally borrow that kind of power, so as to reach the top of this universe. He controlled the power, and naturally knew the ultimate truth, the limits of all, so he used that method. With the blood of hundreds of millions of spirits, the divine body is cast to serve as a mortal body of its own retreat, retaining its full strength and landing there. Sword Muzu was shocked. The words of Lao Zun made it very clear. The reason why Chiting lured nearly 10 million monks was to build a body and act as a mortal body that he should have faded out, so as to retain all his strength. And what is there in that unknown place that makes Chiting so devoid of humanity? Both were silent, and I wondered how long afterwards. Jian Wushuang suddenly said, Chiting also said something to me before he died. He said that I will come to this step one day. Is it true or false? Lao Zun didn't answer, but the name of Jian Wushuang was rare. Wushuang, have you ever remembered 3 promises between us? Jian Wushuang nodded, remember. Then, can I still count? It must be done. Jian Wushuang nodded firmly, and then he seemed to understand what he said, and said, wait until this is done, let's start. Lao Zun smiled slightly, not in a hurry, I have been asleep for a long time, I don't know how long I have to wait for a while, it doesn't matter. Chapter 4663. One figure, one old and one young, traveled in the heavens and earth. The size of the universe is uncountable. Although each heavenly domain coexists, it exists independently. This is invisible, and it naturally adds a lot of difficulties for Jian Wushuang and Lao Zun to find mud tires. Since then, their journey is no longer counted in white millennia, the most optimistic estimate, I am afraid it will also take millions of years. At the same time, Jian Wushuang is also a little curious. Judging from the battles of millions of years ago, the ancestral mud tires were vicious and violent. Jian Wushuang is confident, even if the ancestral mud tire only emits a breath for a moment, he can feel it instantly in the poor pole universe. But after a million years passed, the mud tire did not leak a little bit of breath, which made Jian Wushuang have begun to doubt whether the mud tire has died or slept. If it is the latter, the ancestral deep sleep, Jian Wushuang dare not imagine what energy he is accumulating, what kind of damage it will cause to the divine universe. Therefore, in any case, he must find and kill the Chiting mud tire within 1 million years, otherwise the journey to heaven will end, and it will be delayed for a while. At the speed of Jian Wushuang and Lao Zun, even in the next 10,000 years, I found countless stars and territories, and I didn't find any bit of the mud tire at all. Has found some virtual powers who are almost exhausted in many star fields and are about to die. After wavering mercilessly to kill them, Jian Wushuang went on. Every ancient field in the star field has never been lost. Lao Zun, how long do you say we can find the mud tire? In the vast ancient world, a noisy and bustling market, Jian Wushuang and Lao Zun sat by the window in the street tea house. Lao Zun took a sip of the tea on the table and said indifferently, it can be as little as 100,000 years, as much as 1 million years, at most not more than 10 million years. Why is it at most 10 million years? Jian Wushuang asked in response. Lao Zun said, because at that time, the body's sperm and blood will dry up, so he can't hide it anymore. Although this is said, but it has also been a long time for us. Jian Wushuang frowned as he touched his chin. You have to think of a way. When the two had a casual narrative, there was a rough noise in the street market. Saw dozens of men dressed in tight-fitting leather armor, walking out of the street corner, everyone's body exudes a strong monk atmosphere. And in the middle of these men, a prison car wrapped in black cloth was pushed forward. After seeing this scene, some Xiao consciously gave way to stop and wait and see. Wang Wushuang, who was sitting against the window, probed with his divine power, and saw the one in the prison car, squeezing nearly 30 or 40 thin bodies, unknowingly trying to step forward. Lao Zun said quietly, "The size of the universe, what is happening right now is just a passing moment, even if you save them, it doesn't make any sense." Sword Wushuang sat back again. What the old master said was not unreasonable. These mortal beings were just a moment in the reincarnation, and even if they were rescued, they could not change any process. Although it was such an imagination, his mind still followed those monks and looked around. In the very center of the market, a group of more than 10 people stopped, and the sturdy man headed seemed tired and abnormal, and there was even an unhealthy, greasy wound on his left shoulder. Hula, he directly lifted the shady curtain on the prison car, revealing the contents inside. Perceived the light beam, and the restlessness in the prison car was resounding. Nearly 30 women with dark skin and black wings looked at the monk who was surrounded with terror. These bird-like women, whose entire eyeballs are obscured by turbidity flaps, barely look at their eyes. They live in the deep mountain swamp all the year round, and they rarely come into contact with other creatures until their death. After seeing what was in the prison car, most of the monks' eyes were dull and they retreated without hesitation. And the other small group of monks shine their eyes and talk quickly. "What's the price?" Some monks approached and asked. Led the strong man with a tired expression, "Unify 10 pieces of heavenly crystals, all want to get off the bargain." A number of monks heard that although the price was a little bit painful, but the Jackdaw clan seldom had a monk to catch it. They missed it and didn't know when they could meet it. Eventually, it was a painful delivery of dozens of crystals. For low cultivation, what can increase the body is far more important than a mystery. And the heads of the jackdaws have condensed beads that enhance the 5 senses, so they can be sold for a very high price. Tianjing, which contained extremely refined divine power, started, and the strong man ordered the rest of the people to open the prison car and quickly selected these jackdaw women. The selected jackdaw woman, through the hands of the strong man, directly swiped with her finger, then took out a black bead from the jackdaw's head and handed it to every monk. Once the condensed beads were stripped, the jackdaw woman could not survive and died directly. The thin figure in the prison car is also decreasing. Just as the strong man was busy peeling off the condensed beads, a fascinating voice sounded from the monks. "I bought all the rest." Looking around, I saw a young monk dressed as a ranger squeeze out the crowd, holding dozens of crystals, and walked over. The strong man glanced at him, and then looked at the middle of the prisoner car. "There is only one last, if you want, 8 heavenly crystals." Sword Muzu nodded slightly, still gave him nearly 20 crystals in his hand. "This one, I will live directly." The brawny man raised his eyebrows and smiled. Many children in the family clan had their own hobbies, but he didn't interfere too much. He directly pulled the iron chain and dragged out the last extremely thin jackdaw woman, and gave it to Jian Wushuang. "These monsters are the most durable. You just need to feed them a mouthful of clean water and dry food for a few months." Zhuang Shuo Man added intimately. However, at this moment, another impatient voice resounded, "This last one, I want Xiao Wang." Jing Wushuang, who was about to leave, was also surrounded by more than a dozen low repairs. A young man in a Chinese suit with a high-spirited, sullen face, quickly came to him, reaching out to grab the jackdaw girl. The next moment, it was a powerful foot to welcome the young man in the Chinese costume. Howling, the youth in the Chinese costumes didn't even have time to release the energy in the body. The whole person flew out, and the big head and neck were almost kicked into the abdominal cavity. "Where's the wild dog?" Jian Wushuang said lightly, and then slowly took the jackdaw girl away, and no one dared to block. Chapter 4664. When nearly 1,000 monks broke into the tea shop, they had already gone to tea. This tiny episode was accompanied by the departure of Jian Wushuang and others, and finally ended without illness. And the young jackdaw girl who was bought by the Red was also left beside him because of Jian Wushuang's heart of concealment. Leaving this star field, Jian Wushuang went to the rest of the heavens and the world without any pause, looking for possible clues. This almost endless search, no one knows when it will continue. Jian Wushuang has already made up his mind. If the mud tire of Chitting is not found within 1 million years, he will suspend the matter and rush back to Yunxiao Palace. The extremely weak jackdaw girl followed him, and the Shouyuan, which was originally 1,000 years old, was also extended. At the same time, he broke through the shackles of numerology and embarked on a path of monasticism. After 100,000 years, 3 black robes stood under a very remote starry sky, and looked at the dead and cold star field. Jian Wushuang said in a deep voice, "Jack, are you sure this is it?" The jackdaw woman whom he rescued and named simply, closed her eyes at this moment, and the invisible and psychic 5 senses spread in the world. After a moment, Jackdaw opened his eyes and nodded firmly. "Adult, the breath of death came from here. There are thousands of avenues, and the jackdaw family's perception of the breath of life far surpasses the rest of the races, which is why the condensed pearl in the head of the jackdaw monster will become a spiritual treasure that the monks are rushing to." On this point, Jian Wushuang found out occasionally, which only saves most of the time. Since Kiting's mud tires are not showing their shape, Jian Wushuang changed his mind and began to look for the most solemn star field. With this search, I found out that more than 100 heavens have been transformed into dead domains. No longer speaks, and the 3 figures directly step into the dead star field. "Hey, it's not right, the life is so heavy here, why don't you see the undead, but it is as prosperous as the ordinary market." Settled on the street market, Jian Wushuang looked at the monks who were almost rubbing their shoulders in front of him, and could not help but wonder. "Jackdaw, are you sure the dead energy here is the most intense?" The jackdaw was also confused. "Bad, Lord, I clearly feel that this is the place, how could there be a living person?" Sword Muzu is also a little puzzled. Is this the same as the cultivator of the imaginary universe? Cultivation is based on the dead air? But then, he seemed to find something again, glancing at the monk on the street. The density of these monks seems to be a little too dense, and they are constantly emerging from the houses on both sides of the street, almost to the point of rubbing shoulders. They seem to be surrounded. Jian Wushuang, though a little puzzled, was already alert. At the next moment, a clear voice rang from the top of the 3 people's heads. "I said you broke into here without permission, don't you even want to die?" Looking at it, I saw a young monk carrying a coffin on the roof of a restaurant, looking at them lazily. Then, the young monk suddenly swept up, picked up the exaggerated coffin on the back and bombarded straight down. The coffin with violent divine power smashed down, and directly flew nearly 1,000 monks surrounded by the whole body nearly 100 meters away. At the same time, the young monk stepped on the coffin and screamed, "Come with me if you want to survive, otherwise you can't survive." After the words were finished, the young monk lifted the coffin and smashed it to the ground, and acted as a pioneer to smash the monks who came around again. Every monk who was hit by a coffin was like scattered mud, but it was scattered. At this moment, even the jackdaw noticed something was wrong. It turns out that these monks who are no different from living people have no spirits. Jian Wushuang and Lao Zun glanced at each other for the first time, confirming that there might be a mud tire of chitting hidden in this star field. In order to avoid playing grass and startling snakes, they did not release their respective powers, but quickly followed the young monk holding the coffin like a sledgehammer. Belongs to the ultimate dominance of the realm, and also makes Jian Wushuang look at him immensely. After all, in such a distant and extremely divine star field, it is really a remarkable thing to cultivate to the level of breaking through the shackles. The huge coffin almost became an unfavorable heavy weapon in the hands of the monk. Every time it smashed down, nearly 100 monks who lost their souls were wiped out. Over the next half-day, the young monks showed great power and quickly wiped out all the monks in this area. In case of emergency, all 3 of them sat on the roof under his instructions. "Speak, how did you come here? I don't think your realm is too high, are you the same survivors like me?" The young monk looked at the 3 men and asked with a dull look. Jian Wushuang did not answer his question, but said with a puzzled face, "What happened here? Why is the death so rich, and why did the monks attack us?" When the young monk heard this, Common could not help but sigh. "That's because everyone here has died, including the monk who besieged you just now. It's already dead." Jian Wushuang heard the words, and there was already some clarity in his heart. "Then do you know everything that happened in this area, and the causes and consequences?" "Of course I know that although things have been happening for hundreds of thousands of years, I still remember clearly." The young monk said, Do you want to know? Please also explain that this matters. It's okay to say it, and I haven't spoken to outsiders for more than 100,000, just to relieve the boredom. The young monk breathed out, and then came out. That is, hundreds of thousands of years ago, at that time, it was also a monk's monastery, and the various sects were prosperous. They were not all reduced to the dead domain as they are now. All the reasons are because of that day. Seemed to be reminiscing, and a panic appeared in the eyes of the young monk. That day, the entire sky was replaced by darkness, and even the big day was swallowed, and then a grim and strange face replaced the entire sky. The gruesome strange face has a mouth, the divine power between heaven and earth, and the breath of life have been sucked by him, and no monk can escape. Seeing that they turned into a body without a soul before my eyes, I realized that the robbery was coming. Because the method I learned is very unique, I can barely switch between life and death, so I hid in the coffin and escaped. It's just that I have only been awakened from the coffin in recent years and have lived alone in this world so far. The young monk's face can't see any expression, just like describing other people's things. Chapter 4665. After listening to the young monk's words, Jian Wushuang nodded secretly. Judging from the approximate time point, he could urge such a terrifying energy to encroach on the soul of the entire monk of the starfield, which is in line with Chitting's disappearing mud tire. After roughly confirming that this is the situation of Chitting mud tires, Jian Wushuang again asked, "Did you notice the dead energy or other most complex places in this world in these years?" The young monk thought a little, and then nodded. "Naturally, I have seen it. In the extreme north of the sheltered waters, every 100,000 years or so, a heavy cloud will rise, and the cloud will cover the sky, and I will lie in the coffin and take refuge. Counting, the thick water will be rising again in the sheltered territory." Sword Wushuang nodded, and stared at Lao Zun to cover, then arched his hand. "Thank you friends for telling us, then let's not pass this, there will be a period in the future." "Wait, just stop here. Where are you going?" "The sheltered waters in Xiaoyao's mouth." "Where are you going to do? Is it desperate?" The young monk shocked. Jian Wushuang smiled slightly, and when he arched his hands again, he was ready to get up. "Forget it, I'll go with you." The young monk stood up and looked out. "It's already impatient to live this way, it's better to go with you to find out, it's dead. Understand?" Sword Wushuang was dumb, but did not refuse, and the group of 4 swept across the Pisces. This is called the Star Kingdom of the mainland of Yang, and its territorial area is relatively advanced in the divine universe. A huge river that shelters the water almost runs through the entire mainland of Yang, and is extremely magnificent. But nowadays, the riverbed that has been completely dried up is like a dead dragon, meanderingly winding in the continent. At the same time, the distance that was originally like dusk at the moment suddenly rolled up a yellow mist covering the sky and the sun. It's not good, the turbid gas has risen, and it's almost back to the ground. The young monk flying on the coffin was terrified when he saw this scene. But when he saw Jian Wushuang and his group were indifferent, he immediately said nervously, "This turbid gas is not a joke, even if the supreme divine realm comes here, you can only drink on the spot. Little friends are not in a hurry, there is me." Jian Wushuang looked back and smiled slightly, and then walked forward firmly. After hearing this sentence, the young monk somehow settled down inexplicably. "Damn it, you die." He snorted, his whole body lying on the coffin, looking forward to the extreme nervous. The overwhelming turbidity is like a big mouth of blood basin pushing forward and consuming everything. At the next moment, a clear to the extreme, pure to the extreme Zhenmang rushed to the sky, just like the astonishing dragon ascended to heaven, and like the Tianhe rewind, try to vent to the front. Sword Wushuang holds the Tai Luo Excalibur, and one sword is empty. The monk lying on the coffin was shocked to watch this quirky battle in front of him. In his memory, even the most tyrannical ancestor in the mainland of Yang could not survive here for a moment. The monstrous sword intention easily wiped out the muddy air. Heaven and earth complex Qingming. But the next scene made the young monk take a breath. I saw that in the dry riverbed of Pishure River, the bodies of countless monks gathered and piled up in it, like a flowing river of corpses. Perceived the arrival of external forces. The bodies of countless monks who had piled up the entire Pichure riverbed shook at the moment. At the next moment, an almost shocking horror arm composed of corpses suddenly lifted from the Pichure riverbed, grasping and holding the sword. The terrible sonic boom tears the sky. The sword was calm without double-sided color, and looked at the huge palm that almost grabbed him, but pointed a little. The uppermost rule suddenly coagulated into a line, and the whole arm was minced into a powder. After shattering that tremendous arm, there were nearly 100 identical arms, which were swung up from the Pichure river bed and came from the town in all directions like tentacles. The young monk has been completely numb. The war that does not belong to this plane, but now appears in front of him at close range, making him feel like a firefighting with Haoyue. Is equally incredible, and there is Jackdaw, everything is destroying her cognition. She has followed adults for more than 100,000 years, and it turned out to be an untouchable existence. Looking at the terrible energy smashed around him, Jian Wushuang's face sneered. He didn't even want to use Wushuang Kendo, he just reached out and flicked towards the void. Ascended to the rule of the entire heaven and earth, heaving down. The hundreds of horror arms composed of countless corpses were simply unable to withstand the rules of the world, and they collapsed directly, and then turned into a huge amount of flying sand to dissipate. Qi Ting, if you only grow so much, then you will die very hard to watch. Jian Wushuang shouted coldly, and the magnificent breath spread. Boom! The earth began to break, the gully was bursting, and countless dark and strange energies surged from the earth's core. Such strange energy gradually gathered in the air, and turned into a giant image. Sword Muzu, 1,000,000 years, why do you refuse to let me go? Resentment, a stern voice resounded from the colossus' mouth. Jian Wushuang's eyes were calm, because your appearance is a mistake. In order to prevent this mistake from getting bigger and bigger, I can only erase it. Soundingly grandiose, do you think you are my opponent now? The colossus snorted. Don't do the battle of the trapped beast, remove the source yourself, read it earlier than you wish, I promise you to enter the reincarnation. Jian Wushuang said lightly. The colossus smiled and shrunk to several feet in a flash, revealing the origin of the mud tire. I should say this to you, do you really think that I am comparable to Chitting now? The terrible breath of ancestor level gushing out of the mud body, instantly changing the color of the world, and everything began to vanish into powder. I got out of Qi Ting, he was supposed to rob the dead ghost, but heaven and earth repeatedly, he died, but I am still alive, in the end I should be most grateful, or your sword Wushuang. In order to thank you better, I decided to devour you and torture you to death bit by bit. The energy belonging to the ancestors burst out from the body of the mud, turned into countless great horrors, and the sky dome collapsed, and the entire Yeong starfield was directly destroyed in the void. At the same time, supreme resentment built an evil dojo, enveloping everyone present. Chapter 4666. As the dojo transformed from supreme grievances swept over, Jian Wushuang waved his hand directly in the air to stroke it. The intangible and intangible avenue rule centered on him, sheltering everyone. Looking into the eyes, I only felt that the heavens and the earth fell into the extreme darkness. The mud tire was the pinnacle of the universe, and the ancestral aura could even be resisted by Jian Wushuang. Located at the very center of the evil dojo, the mud tire smiled sullenly, and under the wave of his palm, the void broke into the abyss of heaven, while countless horror and strange souls struggled from within, sending out painful and hysterical crying. The shocking magic sound shouted at the moment, the jackdaw and the young man were lost directly, and blood was pouring from their mouths and noses, and it was almost dead. The scepter in the hand of Lao Zun gave a light meal, and the Blackwater enchantment wrapped the two of them, and then pushed away from the fighting range. The innumerable souls are all mud tires who madly engulfed monks in this 1,000,000 years. Their uncomfortable resentment and the power of terror, even the swordsmen, had to keep their hearts on the platform to avoid being eroded by the magic sound. Tai Luo Excalibur started, but then it surprised him. The tyranny of the Tai Luo Zhenjian fetus was unexpectedly released, and he may bite the master at any time. Sword Wushuang frowned slightly, and put the Tai Luo Excalibur in the sheath, and then called out the invisible sword. The invisible sword is formed by the purest sword intention after he mastered Wushuang Kendo, Xing'e sword intention. Is one of the Taiji Excalibur, one of the ancestors of Lianji Dao. No matter how fit or pure it is, it can no longer be compared with it. In a certain way, the invisible sword is also the ancestor, and it belongs to the ancestors of Jian Wushuang only. Started with the invisible sword, Jian Wushuang did not stay at all, and directly released the first form of Xing'e Star. The majestic view, the rules of the avenue are condensed in this sword, and it is turned into the sword of Chongxiao. At the same time, a tremendous pair of treasures appeared in the back of Jian Wushuang, and he also wielded the heaviest sword. The evil dojo collapsed in an instant, and the countless souls rushing out of the fissures of the heavens only came out and uttered a scream, and they all vanished in the vast sword. Hundreds of thousands of pillars rose up, completely crushing the layout of chitting mud tires. Under this contrast, even the big sun hanging above the star field faintly fell. The chitting mud tire has a deep and evil gaze, and a large array of compasses with cipher texts appears quietly, besieging Muzu and Lao Zun at the same time. Turn it into my nourishment, I promise to take you to find that arrogant realm. He opened his arms and looked at Jian Wushuang intoxicated. Jian Wushuang did not speak, he felt that the large array of compasses under his feet was constantly weakening the divine power. Immediately after the next moment, from that compass array suddenly rushed out countless grievance ghost hands, and madly dragged towards the two. Lunghung sword Wushuang was about to take the shot, but Lao Zun took his first step, and the black water scepter suddenly stopped. The unique power beyond the level of divine power spreads like ripples in the waves, and the newly raised ghost hand directly perishes. Even with the grotesque compass array, there were numerous cracks. At the same time, Jian Wushuang stepped out in one step, with a steady momentum, held up the invisible sword in his hand, and threw it straight at the chitting mud tire. The brilliant divine power punctured the ancient darkness and hit him in the heart. There was extremely bright light flashing, and the chitting mud tire, which was almost cut into two sections by the invisible sword, stood blankly as if it had not yet reacted. At the next moment, the void twisted rapidly, the mud tire smiled strangely, and the almost chopped body recovered instantly, leaving no trace of trauma. Jian Wushuang's heart sank. In a million years, he has grown to such a degree. Still with arms wide open, cheating mud tire smiled sullenly. I am Dadao, who can kill? Just after his words just fell, a scepter, like a pillar of Optimus, was directed at him and fell down. Only heard the sound of bang, the left half of chitting mud tire was directly broken. An ancestor-level power surge that could not suppress the crazy spout, he groaned loudly, covering the torn wound hard. Jian Wuwei exposed the sarcasm. Just dare to call Dadao? Are you afraid of this newspaper? Reluctantly to stop the energy released in the body, the chitting mud tire has already weakened to another level. Looked at him bitterly, and Kiting's mud tire turned around directly, turning into thousands of faint lights scattered in the void. Want to go? Jian Wushuang sneered, reaching out in the void for a while when the rule of the road collapsed. And the mud tires that turned into scattered light were directly caught by the rules of these avenues and could not move at all. No, you can't kill me. Perhaps it was a premonition that he was facing the great horror of life and death, and Kiting's mud tires were terrified. I am the incarnation of the rules of the Dadao, no one of you can kill me, he continued to yell. Using the supreme supernatural power, after compressing it into a dust-sized shape, Jian Wushuang looked at the mud tire struggling between his fingers and was ready to kill. But to his surprise, although the figure of the mud tire was easily twisted out, but after a while, it reunited again, which is extremely erratic. He has surpassed the rules of this universe, you can't kill him. Lao Zun said calmly. Jian Wushuang also understood it when he thought about it, no longer insisted on killing the mud tires, and then extracted his source to seal it up. After doing all of this, he took a breath. Before the disappearance of the chitting mud tire, he became a heart disease for millions of years. After being suppressed, everything finally returned to the right track. This is finally completely settled down. Jian Wushuang slightly sighed. What is the next step? Lao Zun asked. Sword Muzu replied, return to Yunxiao Palace, after finishing some things, lead the army into the virtual universe, and destroy it completely. Lao Zun nodded and did not speak again. Using the power of the avenue, Jian Wushuang waved his hands back to restore the star field that was destroyed by the battle. The spring grass was resurrected, the refuge water was surging again, and all creatures were bred in the meantime. However, the countless monks who were trapped by the chitting mud tires could not be resurrected. With the rebirth of everything, countless corpses gradually turned into a cup of flying sand. Feeling a tingling pain from his body, the young monk comatose on the coffin board woke up from the coma. "What's going on? I remember this place has not been destroyed yet." Looking at the grassy ground, the young monk murmured, but soon his eyes turned to himself, and he could not help but exclaim. Saw that his entire body escaped countless white mans. Chapter 46-67. As if it was about to collapse, the divine power that filled the body slowly scattered in the air. "Here, what's going on?" He was a little flustered, but found that he couldn't even do the simplest turn. After seeing this scene, the jackdaw, who was also awake on the side, also flashed a bit of sadness in her eyes. How could she not understand what was happening at the moment, who was extremely sensitive to death? Jian Wushuang and Lao Zun descended to the ground and walked slowly to him. Leaned against the coffin, and half of the young monk's figure had turned into a bit of white mango dissipated. "Am I already dead?" He raised his head a little bit hard and looked at the godlike man in front of him. Jian Wushuang's eyes were dim, and he nodded slowly. As long ago, when they first came into contact, Jian Wushuang already realized that the young monk had no spirit of life. Perhaps it was because of the chitting mud tires that he retained his wisdom and exists as a dead body to this day. Now that the chitting mud tires are confined by Jian Wushuang, the source of power that naturally maintains his body has disappeared. Recovering from the initial panic, the young monk said lightly, "So I have already been like them. I thought I was the only survivor, but okay, it was boring for hundreds of thousands of years a night." After saying this sentence, the body of the young monk finally turned into a bunch of white mans. Jian Wushuang reached up and picked up the white mango, rubbed it into an extremely bright star, and then embellished the sky. "Let's go, everything here will be left to future generations." Jian Wushuang smiled, and the three figures finally disappeared. Originally expected the task of 1 million years, completed 800,000 years in advance, Jian Wushuang and others returned on this journey, and rushed back to the Yunxiao Palace. In this way, at the end of the 300,000th year, Jian Wushuang and Lao Zun finally returned to Yunxiao Palace. And the taciturn, who saw Jian Wushuang as the whole girl of Jackdaw, has long lived on a certain day in more than 200,000 years. 4 high-level monks, 200,000 years is just a time of retreat, but the poor polar universe, everything in the world, the mortal world with sparse power, the pawns who cant practice, and the slightly strange feelings are the foundation. 200,000 years, it was already the most wonderful and long life for the Jackdaw girl. Looking at the giant palace as calm as hundreds of thousands of years, Jian Wushuang smiled slightly and entered the Yunxiao Palace. Guarding outside the Yunxiao Palace, the 2 descendants of the dragon clan shrugged and continued to sleep. Jian Mushuang's return did not cause much shock, because there were not many people in the entire Yunxiao Palace. Lan Lan, Ba Wang and others have been stationed in the ancient Shinkong Road, and few have returned to the Yunxiao Palace. Blood Sovereign led more than 100,000 supreme sovereigns to defend the battlefield outside the territory. Stationed on the way to Tianmen. As for the Dragon and Phoenix clan, they have also returned to their respective starfields, leaving only more than 100 clan neutrons stationed in the Yunxiao Palace. The years passed, and the new moon replaced Yangchun. Has passed for 500,000 years. On top of the cloud, Jian Wushuang happily held a jade fishing rod and was fishing in the sea of clouds. Is beside him, accompanied by Lao Zun, Yang, and of course Fengqi. The little fish transformed by the divine power is tumbling in the sea of clouds. Whenever it comes to eating a hook, Jian Wushuang raises the rod to prevent the fish from touching it. I said, "Jian Wushuang, you guys are all bored. We have been fishing for more than 100,000 years, and we haven't caught a single fish." Fengqi on the side was full of black lines, and his voice was angry. Fishing is a matter of great consideration for patience and physical strength. I only wanted to catch a fish in 100,000 years. Let's talk about fishing for another 100,000 years. Jian Wushuang is serious. Shook his head slightly. Feng Qi no longer complained, but also caught some kind of fishing. Has been fishing in the Sea of Clouds for 500,000 years, which is also the most wanton time for everyone. No one will know what will happen next, not even the sword Wushuang standing at the top of the universe. In the following time, Bloodwave Supreme and others who were stationed outside the battlefield began to return to the Yunxiao Palace one after another. Is waiting for them. It is the first time that the divine universe has reopened the heavenly gate after the catastrophe. Every 100,000 years, there will be a lot of geniuses in the original Shinkong ancient road, but only by going through the path of the heavenly gate, it is possible to eventually reach the Yunxiao Palace and become a disciple of eternal God. The way to the heavenly gate is another way of trial that Jian Wushuang started after achieving the ancestor God. If you want to enter it, you must first pass the examination of the ancient Shinkong road. Everyone is faintly looking forward, and can be recognized by nearly 20 invincible supremes, and a half-ancestral superpower. What kind of amazing talents will it be? But the special existence like Jian Wushuang that has surpassed genius and is no longer within the scope of consideration. 1,000,000 years ago, on that day, the bell was ringing in the morning, and Xianianhao was ringing for 9 days and 10 places. Everything is proceeding in an orderly manner. The giants of all parties gathered in Yunxiao Palace. Jian Wushuang sat in front of Yunxiao Palace. He was obviously looking forward to something, looking into the distance with a smile. Under the haze of cloud smoke, the 9 Tribulation King who attacked by Shengsheng Shui walked slowly in front of Yunxiao Palace. Behind him were more than 20 invincible supreme. Back to eternal God, Ju Tribune and others are fortunate not to lose their lives. The King of 9 Tribulation arched all the hands. Jian Wushuang smiled slightly, reached out and waved Huameng, "I'm bothering you." Covered by the supreme Huameng, the 9 Tribulation King and others only felt that the fatigue in the god's body was all dissipated and the divine power was full. Then, at the end of the square, 6 slightly immature figures appeared in everyone's eyes. Facing the supreme true dragon on the 2 sides of the pillars, these 6 bodies did not have the slightest timidity, and walked steadily. At the forefront of these 6 bodies, there is a handsome young man dressed in a green shirt and with picturesque eyes. There was no flinching in his eyes, but only calmness. At the same time, he also didn't understand in his heart. When he came to the most mysterious and belongs to the Yunxiao Palace, which is the pinnacle of the entire universe, why didn't he feel the strangeness and fear in the slightest sense, but had a strange sense of familiarity? Get rid of the unrealistic thoughts of the alarm clock, and the young man in the blue shirt gradually accelerated his pace. Recalling what he had experienced on the way to that vast and terrifying heavenly gate, the other 5 at the same time shivered without a trace, and also stepped forward quickly. Few people at Yunxiao Palace were present. How did the people who passed the examination of the heavenly gate pass through? But they knew that the appreciation of the supreme people who participated in the Battle of Havoc was already enough to stand up to 99 of the geniuses of the divine power universe. Chapter 46-68. Long walked to the Cloud Palace, the young man in the blue shirt finally felt the inexplicable tension from the bottom of his heart. Almost full-bodied, the condensed divine power was breathless, and the endless supreme supremacy seemed like an insurmountable mountain-high mountain, breathtaking. At the same time they saw that there was such an almost unimaginable existence that was terrifying in the Tianmen. This, 00 reading book 00KXS, engraved actually has digit. And in the most central part of those horrible beings, there is a man in a white Chinese suit with a handsome face and a prestigious temperament. The atmosphere was extremely tense, and cold sweat poured out of each of their temples unconsciously. "Are you here?" The white shirt man sitting on the head smiled, his voice falling from 9 days. The young man in the blue shirt finally reacted, and hurriedly bowed the salute. "I have seen eternal God." Jian Wushuang smiled faintly. "Don't be discreet, kids, we should get along for a while. Tell me, when did you practice monasticism, and how did you do it?" The 6 people nodded and promised. The youth in the blue shirt took the lead and said, "Return to the eternal God, which is called Qingxiu in the next day. More than 1.73 million have been practiced since then. As soon as this statement came out, all the supremes in the Yunxiao Palace looked at it with horror. It is a matter of 1.73 million years to enter the supreme divine realm, which is simply impossible to imagine. It must be understood that this is just a time for enlightenment. Even Feng Qi and Longyang Longkai and others were also a little surprised. They all cast their gazes at the kid named Qingxiu. The king of nine tribulation is still indifferent. Perhaps it is an unthinkable thing for all the supreme to achieve the supreme for more than 1 million years. But for the nine tribulation king who entered the Yunxiao Palace with Jian Wushuang millions of years ago, it is obviously not enough. Because of Jian Wushuang's cultivation experience, he has forcibly lifted the king of nine tribulation to another level. The year he went straight to the supreme, even less than 850,000 years. Yes, it's a terrifying arrogance. Jian Wushuang nodded with satisfaction, and then looked at the other five. Although the following five people's spiritual journey did not have the shock from the Qingxiu, it was still an unimaginable existence. Among them, the oldest person who has the most spiritual practice is no more than 30 million years old. It is conceivable that the few arrogants who passed the way of the heavenly gate will definitely be able to grow to the state of invincibility and supremacy in the future, and even the youth in the blue shirt may grow to the state of a half-ancestor. After briefly asking about the practice, Jian Wushuang smiled and asked a question. There are thousands of cosmic avenues. What is your ultimate intention in this practice? The six people looked at each other, but then they talked about it happily. Compared with the ordinary civilians who have a rest in the world, they can reach all things, and they are really more exciting and enthusiastic. But even if it is wonderful and enthusiastic again, in the nearly long years, who will keep the original intention, or have the original intention? 5 answers, 5 seek longevity. Only the young man in the blue shirt had a blank face from beginning to end. He seemed to have set foot on the road of monasticism without any original intention, and everything seemed to be logical until today. Back to eternal God, I don't know. There is stillness in the Yunxiao Palace, and all the supreme nods are smiling, silent. Jian Wushuang laughed, and he seemed to be extremely comfortable. After a moment, he looked at the blood waves that accompanied the left and right sides. Zhu Jie and others smiled. Come on, choose your lovers. Promise. Blood wave, Zhu Jie, Feng Qi, Longyang Longkai and others bowed their hands to promise. 5.5 ancestors selected the 5 people corresponding to each other, but no one selected the young Qing shirt. The loss appeared from the bottom of his eyes. Maybe the sentence I do nt know, let him break the road from now on. Just as he was sad, the dignified voice sounded again. Qingxiu, would you like to be my disciple under my door? Was shocked, and Qingxiu looked up at eternal God in disbelief. At the next moment, he directly knelt and fell to the ground, trembling. The disciple is willing. Jian Wushuang smiled and lifted him up by the wind. No need to be discreet, you are my disciple from now on, then I will give you the word. Everything is subject to master. Qingxiu excitedly said. Look, how about the word Dao Yang? Jian Wushuang smiled. Qingxiu chanted several sounds silently, and then he uttered his hands and said, Disciple Dao Yang, Xieshizu and fell. Jian Wushuang didn't speak anymore, and looked at them with a few words of humanity. Sit down, let me discuss some issues with you. At this point, all the Supremes are now heading back, gradually leaving the Yunxiao Palace. The beginning of this futon hearing indicates that these 6 people, the future achievements will definitely not stop at the invincible Supreme. And the young man in the blue shirt, which was written by the of the universe, could not guess where he would go. Looked at the Yunxiao Palace gradually hidden in the top of the cloud, Feng Qi smiled faintly. It was just over 2 million years. The green lotus that was sent to the lower realm finally grew to the present level 2 million years ago. He was the green lotus next to eternal God. 210,000 years later, he became a disciple who sat down, and everything seemed to have its own number. Feng Qi turned around and pulled the sleeve of the 9 Tribulation King beside him. I said, how does the disciple accepted by Jian Wushuang compare to his talent? Zhu Jie smiled slightly. The sword of Wushuang was more terrible than the little guy at the moment. He was a guy who would make everyone eclipsed in front of him. Looking at the figure of the 9 Tribulation King flew away, Foam Chi shrugged. Yes, it is only the sword that can make such an arrogant guy to say such a thing. Skyrim Cirrus Cloud Shu, this futon heard, has lasted for nearly 100 years. The sound of the avenue rises steadily above the cloud top. When the clouds blocking the front of Yunxiao Palace gradually disperse, the 6 bodies blessed the heaven and earth avenue and walked out slowly. Everyone, without exception, has become invincible supreme. Their eyes are no longer blank, but have their own beliefs and goals. Since then, the 6 invincible supremacy have all remained in the Yunxiao Palace. The blood wavelength is old, the elder giant axe. You are not curious why I put the word Daoyang on Chinka's body? In the beginning, there was some confusion, but now we are also epiphany. Haha, he is a freshman of Brother Daoyang, but he is no longer Brother Daoyang, but in the final analysis, it is just my part. 3 figures sitting on the top of the fairy cloud to reminisce old, a long wind blew through, and soon covered everything. Chapter 4669. In the same year, Bloodwave Supreme announced that he would withdraw from the position of Vice Palace of Life Shrine, and Life Shrine ushered in a new Vice Palace, that is, the Green Canal that had been written by the of the universe. He was more calm than 100,000 years ago. His eyes were full of joy and sorrow, as if he had experienced the birth and death of all things, but the only constant, still has a young mind. For millions of years, the fault after the catastrophe of the universe and the chaos of chitting has not been completely restored. There is only more than 200,000 in the Supreme, and the entire generation is almost dead. Has a sword without double luck. Although this situation has been alleviated, it still takes a short period of time. The civil unrest subsided, and the complete liquidation of the imaginary universe was already on the agenda. In front of the Shrine of Life in the outer battlefield, nearly 200,000 supreme people have already gathered. These exalted people who have survived the catastrophe and survived to this day have practiced meditation in front of the Yunxiao Palace for millions of years. They have already existed like old monsters. 200,000 supreme, 200,000 invincible supreme, each of them is the existence of the destruction of the starfield. Right now, they all gathered in front of the extraterritorial battlefield. Once again set foot in this foreign battlefield, all kinds of past rush into the heart, has been put on a ranger clothing sword Wushuang, looking at the extremely deep. This time, the virtual universe will be completely destroyed, down to the world, up to the virtual kingdom of the star domain, no one will be left. This is a guarantee for the divine universe, and it is also a promise to the old god. Looking back at the supreme army behind him, Zhen Wushuang rushed to the battlefield outside the territory. Old Venerable, Bloodwave Supreme, 9 Tribulation King, Fengqi, Longyang Longkai and others all followed. All of them did not hesitate in the eyes of each of them, and firmly followed behind Zhen Wushuang. Nearly 300 years after the War of Catastrophe, the sword of Wushan boarding the eternal god began to counterattack and liquidate the virtual universe. Waved his hands with supreme divine power to tear the cracks across the 2 universes, and the divine and virtual forces collided with each other at this critical point. The crack was torn into heaven, and after the chaotic virtual force, it was the star domain of the virtual force universe. Stepped into it, the eternal Excalibur, which represents the ultimate power of the divine universe, directly cracked the star field in a large area. Due to the demise of the imaginary god, the luck of the imaginary universe has already decayed to a certain extent, and the exclusion of the rules of the Tao has already played a very low role in the supreme people of the divine universe. The invincible supremacy stepping on the virtual universe is still the invincible supremacy, and the realm is not suppressed at all. Located at the forefront of the army, Zhen Wushuang waved his hand to wipe out the nearly 1,000 star-shaped sergeants who guarded the cracks of the guard, and looked at Lao Zun and other people, and then galloped forward. The ancestral existence of the other universe is unimaginable. Between his waved hands, the starry sky receded like a tide, and the imaginary kingdoms of countless stars fell directly into countless powder. And 200,000 invincible supreme, scattered at the same time in the virtual universe. Every shot of invincible supreme directly and completely smashed one side of the star field. This counterattack is terrible and firm, and it has reached the endless situation of one side. In the scope of group destruction, the destruction brought by the half-ancestor level is not weaker than that of the ancestor level. Fenki's long time, the endless fire area will easily put everything into the sea of fire, and even the virtual force can be burned. In the universe of emptiness, an effective resistance team can no longer be organized, because 99 battles of the imaginary lords of the entire universe died on the battlefield outside the territory. Even the star-level virgins were seriously injured. Again waved hands to destroy nearly 1,000 star kingdoms, and Jian Wushuang's eyes were as calm as water. He seemed to be waiting for something, and did not disperse the supreme army behind him, and proceeded cautiously. Wherever the divine force cosmic army has passed, the virtual kingdom of the star field collapsed in its entirety. That is, even some heavenly kingdoms with the existence of supremacy cannot escape such liquidation. This kind of liquidation is generally ruined, and the starry sky origin from which virtual power is derived is destroyed. In just 1 year, all the millions of star fields around the cracks disappeared, and the junction of the two universes was greatly reduced. The destroyed star field starry sky could no longer generate virtual forces and became a barren space. Faced with such a group of revenge enemies, even the surviving vain venerates have no heart of resistance and fled into the depths of the universe. If you proceed in accordance with this progress, within 10 years of chaos, the virtual universe will inevitably disappear completely. However, everything is absolutely absolute. When the special breath belonging to the Fagoma emerged in the front, Jian Wushuang realized that the most difficult enemies had been exhausted to a certain degree of imagination, and suddenly it was full to the extreme, coming from the depths of the universe of emptiness. Following the appearance of tens of thousands of six-spotted venerables as the power of the stars to arch the moon, at their forefront, there were a total of more than 10 members of the organization. Jian Wushuang's eyes were fixed, even through a strange mask, he recognized at a glance. The bitter who was killed by the old venerable in the battle of the catastrophe and has died to death again appeared again. Lao Zun's brow was slightly wrinkled, and a trace of doubt rose in his heart. At the same time, it is another treasure with a supreme power to visit from the sky dome. Like a crowned emperor, a thunder snake thick like a dragon python floats around the treasure. The emperor devourer who was hit hard by Lao Zun's last blow also appeared. All the supreme hearts are sinking fiercely. This battle since the battle of catastrophe has been unavoidable. Looking at the unimaginable energy floating around him, Jian Wushuang realized that in nearly 3 million years, the Emperor Yang had not only died of serious injuries, but has improved. However, the Emperor Yang did not take the lead, but said with a deep voice, "Sword Wushuang, I have no intention to fight again with Seoul, and I will return to the road to take whatever happened before." When Yang said, Jian Wushuang said softly, "The way back. Do I have to wait until your cultivation is completed, and wait for your comeback?" Bite the Emperor's gaze, Sword Muzu, do you know what you are doing? You cannot bear the consequences of the total destruction of the virtual universe, even the universe behind you. Paused, the Emperor's gaze looked at Lao Zun, and the halberd said coldly, "You are just chess pieces used by him. What if it is a chess piece? Do you think that this sentence alone can stop the defeat of the virtual universe?" Jian Wushuang said calmly, and there was no wave in his eyes. Bite the Emperor, and then sneered, "Since that is the case, then you will all stay here." As his words fell, hundreds of muddy black flags appeared out of thin air, and were instantly thrown into the void. Chapter 4670. After seeing this scene, Jian Wushuang secretly surprised himself, and the hundreds of muddy black flags that appeared out of thin air were the Fengtian flags that were previously lost in the virtual universe. But at this moment, this sky flag is not only valid for the virtual universe as before, and each one is like a supreme array of eyes, firmly fixed in the void, closing all the supremes of the divine universe. Among them, I do not know what secret method the Bite Emperor used to turn the heavenly flag of the divine universe into his own use, but Jian Wushuang knows that they are in trouble. As soon as Feng Tianqi fell into the void, they directly cut off their connection with the universe and the heavens and the earth. The magical power in the body could no longer be derived. Sword Wushuang waved his arms, belonging to the ancestor-level supreme power, blasted towards the endless Fengtian array, but could not shake the slightest. Bite the emperor with a grin, just because you want to break this great array? All die to me. After the words were completed, the emperor, who was also in the Fengtian formation, faced the entire army of the divine universe and released power beyond the rules of the avenue. Void broken, such terrifying energy, only ancestral level can contend with it. All kinds of magical powers are coming one after another. Jian Wushuang directly releases the ancestral art, and cuts out the river of Kendo at the same time. But the power that surpassed the rules of the avenue easily annihilated the Chuanjie Tianmen. Even the Kendo river only blocked it for a moment, and then it was all destroyed. Such terrifying forces are getting closer in Jian Wushuang's pupils. But then Lao Zun shot. He stretched out his hand directly, bursting into endless black water ripples. The two collided, bursting into a dull martyrdom, making all the Supremes numb with hands and feet, and the heart beating wildly. The unimaginable horror energy slowly vents and dissipates, and the sword has no double-sided color. He can feel that the Emperor's Emperor is now stronger and has become a detached rule. Without the slightest pause, the Emperor Yang directly locked his target to Wushuang, releasing a more terrifying energy. However, the next moment Lao Zun was directly in front of him, and the nearly crazy Bite Emperor was firmly contained. With the attack of the Emperor, the nearly 10 members of the organization have also shot, each of which has the terrible half-ancestral strength. After the Bloodwave Supreme and others nodded slightly, Jian Wushuang directly slammed against Yang Yi. "We have met again." A strange and deep voice resounded from the mouthful, and his eyes were completely scarlet. Jian Wushuang frowned slightly when he heard the words, and now he feels strangely bitter, just like a semi-finished product made up of a bunch of parts at random. Whether it is speaking or action, it is very rigid. Puppet, this is the most direct feeling of Jian Wushuang. Doesn't Bite One be the bitter one before? Jian Wushuang said secretly, then he raised the Tai Luo sword and cut straight to Bite One. A weird scene appeared. Biting Yi did not have any dodge. The vast sword intention directly twisted him into countless pieces. But shortly afterwards, the void suddenly picked up a few small black holes, and the already broken body bite slowly and condensed out again and again. You can't kill me. Eat a weird way, and immediately raised his palms to bombard the sword with unparalleled power. Jian Wushuang didn't support it, and directly released the second form of Chuanjie Tianmen. Tianmen was very good. Is as bright as the rising of the sun. The purest blow comes in the face of a crush. Flashes for a very short time, and under this blow, his whole body becomes powder again. Watching the complete disappearance of Yang Yi, Jian Wushuang did not relax at all, and looked frowning slightly forward. Next, just like gathering sand into a tower, the bite that turned into powder was condensed again and again. There was no sound, the two bodies collided heavily, and the forces belonging to the ancestors struck together, sending out a wailing avenue. Sword shattered one's head, but it only grew out in a few seconds, which made Jian Wushuang very confused. He can feel that although he can inflict heavy damage on him, he still hasn't hurt the origin of Biting One. Is a bombardment every time, leaving indelible damage on Jian Wushuang's body. After so repeatedly chopping his body nearly 100 times, Jian Wushuang suddenly realized what? It's impossible. This Bite One, from the beginning to the end, is the real shadow of the bite of the Emperor Bite. With the attitude of giving it a try, Jian Wushuang Yijian split it from it into 2 pieces and reached out to the origin of Yanyi. The Emperor Eater, who was struggling with Lao Zun, was shocked, looking at Jian Wushuang violently. Dare? Jie Tian Da Mang flew towards him at the same time. Jian Wushuang sneered, and took advantage of this great deal, and will take the source of the bite into the hands. This time, the eccentric figure could no longer condense. Sword Wushuang, you it. The Emperor Yang, who has been calm and prestigious, regardless of it, forced the old master to go straight to the sword Wushuang cover and came down. The supreme energy that is as deep as a prison is like swallowing the entire universe. Even if it is the ancestral sword Wushuang, all feel the great terror between life and death. If faced with this blow, his best result is a serious injury. Old Zun Kai aid is too late. On this occasion, Jian Wushuang is almost instinctive through the chitting mud tire ancestral source in his arms. The chitting mud tire was originally exposed to the void, and the mud tire could not wait to get out of the Na stone. Sword Wushuang, I want you to die. Chi-Ting mud tire angered out loudly, but he didn't wait for him to move, and his back was like a thorn. He turned back slowly, and was swallowed by the terrifying energy of the Emperor's bite the next moment. In the entire Fengtian Great Array, like hundreds of millions of large sunbursts, the vast shock wave directly tears the Fengtian Great Array. Because of the dedication of the chitting mud tires, Zhen Wushuang and the Supreme Army behind him had no casualties. However, tens of thousands of venerable venoms died under this indiscriminate attack. Took a deep breath, Zhen Wushuang stared at the void. And the chitting mud tire that could not be destroyed, also under this blow, even a trace of the original source was not left. Bite the Emperor's anger, long hair scattered from the Emperor's crown, like a crazy demon. Feeling the crazed ancestral origin in the palm of my hand, Zhen Wushuang finally realized that this is the real shadow of the Emperor's mud tire. After being sealed in Na stone, the energy that engulfed the Emperor's body also slightly weakened. For a long time, the angry Bite Emperor calmed down again, and said sullenly, "Give me back that point of origin, the life and death of the virtual universe, I will not interfere." Old Master came to the side of Zhen Wushuang, and said quietly, "If you want to go back, you must pass this level first." The atmosphere was strange and dead, and the Emperor bit the pressure to suppress the rage in his heart. "I really want to wait forever. I want to never die. It was not my divine universe at the beginning, but you, your entire organization," Zhen Wushuang coldly said. Chapter 4671. Biting the Emperor gazing stared at Zhen Wushuang, and finally said, "You will regret it, but there will be no room for regret from now on." After he said this, the starry sky began to collapse, nearly 10,000 starfields collapsed at the same time, and countless thunder snakes landed from the ancient void. A unique energy that does not belong to the imaginary universe is derived and blessed around the Emperor's body. The road that belongs to the universe of imagination simply cannot bear and spontaneously collapses. I don't know why, after feeling the unique energy that bit the Emperor's body, Zhen Wushuang actually had a very familiar feeling. Lao Zun's face, which had always been waveless, was now frowning, and the palm of the black water scepter was also clenched. "Wushuang, take people back to the divine universe," Lao Zun said slowly. Zhen Wushuang nodded, and he obviously felt the unusual one among them. "Well, you go with us." Old Master shook his head. "Don't worry about me, go." Wait for the sword Wushuang to open. The bitter Emperor condensed on the void, waved down the black halo, and enveloped everyone in it. "Let's stay, everything has no way out." Bite the Emperor and open his arms slowly, his arms spread slowly, the supreme energy makes the avenue collapse. Zhen Wushuang's mouth twitched slightly. "Since we can no longer walk away, then we too will kill him." Pure and sharp to the extreme, the vast sword is like reversing the long river, rising up, the ancestral divine power broke through the siege and resisted the Emperor's chamber of resistance. And sword Wushuang standing side by side, directly follow the sword straight river chase the Emperor. Waved his hands down to lower levels of punishment, and the ethereal ciphertext seemed to be a large array, which stopped the old statue. The next moment, like the long sword made by the edge, Zhen Wushuang also held up the invisible sword. The supreme god punishment was directly crushed by Jenny, allowing Lao Zun to face the Emperor. The Blackwater scepter turned into a giant palm that covered the sky and smashed towards him momentarily. Gao Ran smiled quickly, backed away from the Emperor's body shape. From above the broken sky dome, suddenly emerged an ugly giant face, directly opened his mouth to bite the old venerable. Dead. A cold drink like the one from the 9-9, Taro Divine Sword turned into an open sky, easily destroying the ugly situation. Two black robe figures, since then, they have joined forces to kill the Emperor. In a million confrontations in a flash, Zhen Wushuang already felt the irreversible weakness of the Emperor Yang. Although the power is still terrifying, no matter whether it is against Lao Zun or Zhen Wushuang, it has already caused no serious injuries. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Zhen Wushuang almost instantly used all his magical powers, trying to hit him hard. reluctantly turned around to destroy the Elder Zun's full blow, and the empty door behind the Emperor Bite was exposed, all exposed to Jian Wushuang's eyes. Heavenly Gate of Right Realm. Heavenly Gate is extremely good. Wushuang Kendo, Xinga Huhai Jenny 2 styles, all of which can't be dripped in the center. Is like the starry sky in the sky, directly covering the entire broken starry sky. Jian Wushuang and Laro Zun receded quickly, looking dignifiedly at the shaded starry sky. Until the vast swordsmanship completely dissipated, a figure slowly emerged. Most of the black Jinhua clothes on S body were broken, and at his heart, a Tai Luo sword was inserted. Bite the Emperor's complexion, reaching for the Emperor's crown above his head, and then pulling out the Tai Luo sword in his heart. Grown-ups. The remaining 6 members of the phagocytic body surrounded him. The Emperor Biting smiled miserably, his arm shuddered suddenly, that would cut off everything. The Tai Luo Excalibur, one of the Jidao ancestors, suddenly broke into 2 parts at the tip of the sword. The pupils of Jian Wushuang's pupils shrank, and the Tai Luo Excalibur, which had accompanied him for millions of years, had been slashed all the way to the present, was actually broken. Thrown by the Emperor, the hilt of the Taro Excalibur was thrown in front of Jian Wushuang. Reached out to catch the hilt, he could no longer suppress the rage, held up the invisible sword, and slashed towards the Emperor. Old Master also set off at the same time. A tremendous black water treasure came close. Ate the black light in the eyes of the Emperor, and waved his arms. 2 dark lights rose in response to the storm, and they were directed towards the 2. Sword cut off the black light. Jian Wushuang was another sword, and Laro Zun's blow was also suppressed. Belonged to Jian Wushuang's strongest blow, breaking through the strange energy that engulfed the Emperor's body, and the black water treasure phase subsequently suppressed. Boom! The endless energy turned into a tide billowing, completely engulfing everything, and the 6 members of the Phagoma who were too late to evade were engulfed in it. The starry sky collapsed in a large area, exposing the void of the ancient dead. Sword Wushuang paused in place, breathing heavily. The entire right arm had cracked out of the road, and the blood was flowing down. When the energy tide slowly receded, the miserable extreme Emperor appeared. He suddenly coughed out a breath of blood, and his face was still dignified despite his embarrassment. You lost. Jian Wushuang stepped forward slowly, his voice cold. I lost. The Emperor Bite was saying to him, and it was like saying to himself, how could I lose? The Emperor Biting suddenly raised his head and looked at him and the Elder Zun. How could I lose? After the words, a vast black light rose from his high palm and went straight into the ultimate void. The dark light, like the giant pillar of the sky, is long-lasting. The layers of dim halo spread like ripples over the void. Sword warriors didn't understand it, but Laro Zun changed his face suddenly. Emperor saw the face of Laro Zun's great changes, and seemed to make a bad breath, laughing aloud. How can I fail? How can I fail? Since I'm going to die, don't think about it too well. I think they will soon sense my breath and lock it here. I want you all to be buried with me. He coughed up his blood again, and the Emperor Bite was crazy. However, there is another way. The power of choice is in your hands. Let me go. I will never let them find here. Jian Wushuang looked at Laro Zun, and he already knew something clearly in his heart. Do you know what I hate the most? A deep voice sounded from Laro Zun's mouth, and his eyes gradually became cold. The most hated is the threat. At the next moment, the Blackwater scepter suddenly flew. Thousands of Blackwater horses directly entangled the Emperor Yang, dragging him towards the Old Master. The dark pupil reflects the birth and death of all things, even the desolation of which time dies. The Emperor finally uttered in horror, No, you can't kill me. Jian Wushuang, I'm dead. Shen certainly won't agree. The Emperor Yang looked at Jian Wushuang, like looking at the last life-saving straw. And Jian Wushuang shivered when he heard the name. How much do you know about him? I know a lot, as long as you let. Without waiting for him to finish, Laro Zun has already completely killed him. Even the soul of the gods has never been left. Chapter 4672. One of the behind-the-scenes pushes to promote the death battle between the two universes. The death of the Emperor is extremely invisible, and die. together with the same mysterious phagocytic tissue, also completely disappeared into the sky of nothingness, and it seemed to have never appeared before. But the death of the emperor bite, but it makes no one feel comfortable. Lao Zun's brows were tight, and his face was never dignified. And Jian Wushuang was already in a state of confusion. This was not the first time he had heard of Xuanyi's news from outsiders, but each time he only stopped at the beginning and ended abruptly. Master, what kind of existence are you? Why am I already on this paradise road, but I still don't get any news from you? Jian Wushuang stared at the void, and suddenly felt a little weak. Lao Zun, I'm a little tired. He slowly closed his eyes. Lao Zun turned to look at him and nodded, then let's go back. No, the imaginary universe will not be removed in one day, and the divine universe will be like a thorn in the back. I don't want to let the juniors shroud in the shadows anymore. Jian Wushuang's eyes flashed with firmness. I want to replace the juniors, erase this biggest threat. However, at the next moment, a breath of chaos and havoc seemed like a mist, which instantly swept over the broken sky. However, this chaotic breath only existed for a moment, and then completely disappeared. But everyone felt the breath of not knowing where to start and how to disappear. Jian Wushuang shuddered in his heart and could not help looking at Lao Zun. A moment later, the old respectful said with a deep voice, "The Eye of Chaos Spring is loose. Retreat." Jian Wushuang didn't dare to delay for a moment, and directly issued a command to retreat. All the Supremes did not hesitate at all, and all released their divine power to sprint towards the universe of divine power. The chaotic spring eye, which symbolizes the extreme point of the divine universe, is the weakest place. Every loosening will bring great horror. At the same time, no one knows where they will be connected one after another in Chaos Spring's eyes. Even Lao Zun is extremely afraid of this. Jian Wushuang didn't dare to imagine what a terrible situation there would be once the Eye of Chaos Spring opened again. Before the Emperor's death, the dark light that he sent to the Sky Dome, and the words he spoke, made him feel a little palpitations. And after the retreat of the Supreme Army, the place where the Emperor Nirvana was originally began to float with fine mottled black stripes. Since it is about to enter the hinterland of the virtual universe, it will take several years to return to the divine universe at their speed. 2 years later, Jian Wushuang and others stepped into the extraterritorial battlefield from the virtual universe, and went straight to the Shrine of Life. Now protecting the whole life divine temple of the divine power universe, it is still calm. Afterwards, the Deputy Hall Master Daoyang Supreme took more than a dozen disciples out of the palace gate and arched the hand. Sword Wushuang nodded, and then asked, in recent decades, can there be something different in the universe? Daoyang Supreme thought for a moment, and shook his head. Everything is still the same, and there is no abnormality, but there are special energy fluctuations in the past few years near the Luoju star field. The disciple I sent earlier to explore has not returned. Jian Wushuang heard the words, when even if he said, all the Supremes are all waiting to guard the Yunxiao Palace, and the half-ancestor will follow me. No one had any controversy. The Supreme Army, which had not suffered many casualties, stood on the spot. Jian Wushuang and a group of half-ancestors rushed to Luoju Starland. After these several events, Luoju Starland has been raised to the highest level of vigilance, and the teams stationed here in turn alone have nearly 1,000 invincible Supreme. Rotates every 1,000 years, and it has been millions of years. But now, the more forward, the weaker the power of the invincible Supreme is almost faintly imperceptible. Damn, don't make any more mistakes. Jian Wushuang secretly said, and his figure accelerated. When the broken Luoju star field is as usual, everyone breathed out. Thousands of invincible Supremes stationed here, all flew out of the city and came to Jianwu double-sided. I have seen the eternal God. Are there any abnormalities in the eyes of Chaos Spring? Jian Wushuang asked. Invincible Supreme, headed by, returned to eternal God. Nothing has been different in millions of years. Jian Wushuang breathed a deep breath in his heart, but before he could speak, the eyes of Chaos Spring, who had been in a silent state, suddenly burst into shocking energy. The domineering aura that easily overwhelms the divine power is like a boundless galaxy, and Lu makes up the entire sky. Seeing this situation, Jian Wushuang directly released the ancestral divine power and turned it into a layer of barriers to block all the invincible supremacy behind him. At the same time, Lao Zun beside him murmured softly, "They, here." The barrier transformed by ancestral divine power was almost instantly covered with cracks. Under the tremendous energy, it actually only supported for a moment, and then collapsed. Lao Zun then raised the Blackwater scepter to face it, only to resist the supreme energy. All the half-ancestors present were shocked. Jian Wushuang and Lao Zun joined hands and were actually able to resist. This can emit such energy. What would Com be? He did not dare to carelessly, gazing at the center of the fiery energy. Next moment, a young man with a long shirt and sword eyebrows walked out slowly. The rules of the avenue belonging to the divine universe were very repulsive, but when he approached him, he turned into a fan. The long hair bundled up behind him floated up against the wind. Jian Wushuang's mood fell to the bottom of the valley instantly. He could feel the energy, not weaker than the Emperor's bite, and even past it. The channel of the Chaos Spring Eye slowly closed, but the energy of the galaxy flooding the sky dome did not decay at all. And the young man who came from the eyes of Chaos Spring first looked at the universe he was in, then stretched out his palm to feel his own energy, and finally looked at Jian Wushuang and others. Looked at Lao Zun for a moment, he was a little puzzled, but finally stopped on Jian Wushuang's body. Then he slowly extended his palm and pointed at Jian Wushuang, "I'm familiar with your breath. Is it the person who broke into the Dian universe millions of years ago?" With this remark, Lao Zun suddenly opened his eyes suddenly. He had never had the gaffe comparable to his current situation. "Have you been to Dianhuan?" Jian Wushuang was instantly clear when he heard the three characters of Dianhuan. Was involved in the chaos of time and space, entered inadvertently, and lay there for 500,000 years. In the beginning, I was involved in the chaos of time and space, and entered a large world. I thought it should be called Dianhuan. Jian Wushuang lowered his voice and said to Lao Zun at a very fast speed. Chapter 4673. Then he raised his head and looked at the young man floating like a fairy quietly. "Exactly." The young man stunned slightly, and then said loudly, "It's useless to say more. Did you send the head to me automatically, or did I pick it up by myself?" Jian Wushuang was depressed, and he began to suspect that he had a killing physique. Step by step to today, there are so many people who want to kill him all the time, and this guy who does not know where to come from now, he has to pick up his head as soon as he comes up. "My head, I'm afraid you are powerless." The young man sneered, "Then I will take it by myself. This sword fairy Ding Bai, don't kill the nameless and asexual people, you self-reported the name, I will take your life again." "Sword Wushuang," Jian Wushuang said coldly. An invisible long sword had already condensed in his hands. The young man who claimed to be the sword fairy Ding Bai, his disdainful eyes gradually disappeared when he saw the invisible long sword in Jian Wu's hands. "I didn't expect it to be such a pure kendo in such a big realm, which is really a blessing," Zhenxian Ding Bai whispered softly. "Well, wait until I appreciate your kendo, then kill you again." After the words were finished, he reached out and flicked his waistcoat, and then a real sword with fairy rhythm appeared. Jian Wushuang's heart moved slightly, a kind of kendo that was also pure to the extreme diffused. "Old master, as soon as we meet, you will leave quickly." After he whispered this sentence, he stood in the air with an invisible sword. Ding Bai reached out his hand and waved, and the vast and magnificent energy was built into a dojo, covering them both. One move, this move is up to you." Ding Bai retreated half a step, carrying his sword behind him, said indifferently. Sword Wushuang didn't have an opening, directly chopped the invisible sword in his hand, and released the first form of the Knight of the Tailuo Jianjian. The dojo suddenly dimmed, and the darkness that could swallow everything came. Ding Bai whispered, and then carved a sword tactic out of thin air with his left hand that didn't hold the sword, which was actually to directly destroy the Yongye style. But when the same 0 and 0 reading 00 kxs of Yongyi was destroyed, a more vicious sword rose into the sky, the atmosphere that controlled the 4 seasons of the universe, and it was overwhelming. Sure or Shuiyang spring and autumn, rise one after another, Just enter here, as if at a glance eternal. Body shirt fluttered against the wind, Ding Bai's calm eyes gradually turned into fiery, lifted up the real sword covered with fairy charm, one sword out. There is no fancy sword, it is a simple flat thorn, but it is very powerful, as if it is close to all, desperate sword. Blended his thoughts of the tarot swordstyle seasons and was defeated, without any suspense. That unique sword easily broke through the four-season swordstyle, and continued to cast forward with a straight cast, crushing the peeper bone of Jian Wushuang's left shoulder holding the sword. The blood of God fell and the bone of God was damaged. Sword Wushuang! Feng Qi exclaimed, and then rushed forward, but was stopped by Lao Zun's hand. With me, Wushuang is unharmed. Feng Qi said that although he stopped, his eyes were full of tension. In the dojo, Jian Wushuang let the blood on his left shoulder drool, staring at Ding Bai. Ding Bai reported with a smile, "The swordsmanship you used just now was not your own. Although it is extremely delicate, it has already lost its intelligence and is not a good one. If I just insisted on taking your head just now, I am afraid that you are not like now this is intact. If your swordsmanship only stops so, then I would advise you to take the lead and kill, and save the ugliness." Sword Muzu didn't speak, slowly raised the invisible sword in his hand, and thousands of swords were spread like vines in the air. At the same time, a solemn unparalleled treasure condensed behind him, majestic. "It's a little interesting." Ding Bai's mouth was tilted, and the sword in his hand was clear. At the next moment, his entire figure was directly transformed into a stream of streamers, straight forward. Sword Muzu suddenly opened his eyes, and the vast sword was like a galaxy of galaxy, and the most pure and extreme straight cut, sinking down. Only this sword, the constructed dojo can't bear it directly and it can be broken. The indescribable sword intention surpasses any of his previous sword. Two pure and extreme swords collided, and the magnificent martyrdom swept the whole world with Jian Wushuang as the center. The sword intention was torn and damaged, and the majestic treasure image behind the sword Wushuang was finally torn. The world mourns, and the invisible and quality roads are all agitated. Seems to be the most tragic martyrdom, but in fact it is just the sharpest sword, piercing all his sword intentions. Sword without both sides exposed bitterness, is this the way to lose? Even Lao Zun can no longer be indifferent. But at the next moment, time seemed to stagnate, and the layers of martyrdom seemed to stop at the last moment of the explosion. And the absolute sword that had no way to stop was also a trembling, and finally stopped before the last layer of sword intention. A long wind blew through, messing up the hair. Looked at the real sword that was only one finger away from his neck, but it was hard to get in. Sword Wushuang then looked at Ding Bai in front of him. The palm of the hand holding the hilt shook uncontrollably. Yu Kanshu www.ukanshu.com. Ding Bai's clear face began to pale, and a drop of rich scarlet blood dripped from his nasal cavity. How? Without a word, he went straight to the sky and passed out. Jian Wushuang's subconscious impulsive power enveloped Ding Bai's divine body and laid him flat in the void. Seeing this situation, the elder Zun and Shuebua Jizuan quickly came to Jian Wushuang. Glanced at him, Lao Zun directly raised the Blackwater scepter to prepare to kill Ding Bai. Lao Zun. Jian Wushuang opened his mouth coldly, reaching out to stop Lao Zun shaking his head. "Can't kill, I feel that he has no strong intention to kill me, and if he kills, he won't win. What time is this? Do you know that he just went further, and the consequences are unbearable?" Feng Qi said anxiously. Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered, and finally he said, "Can't kill, he let me do it before, this time when I gave it back to him." Several half-ancestors sighed quietly and stopped talking. Lao Zun also slowly withdrew the Blackwater scepter and nodded at him. Taking a deep breath, Jian Wushuang looked at the distant road, returned to Yunxiao Palace. The eyes of Chaos Spring were blocked again, and everything seemed to have not happened except for the more broken sky. Back to the Yunxiao Palace, Jian Wushuang set up another divine pavilion, put the white cloth Ding Bai in it, and then used the supreme supernatural power to block all around the divine pavilion. As soon as he woke up, Jian Wushuang could perceive it instantly. Such a Dian who is most likely to come from the secret, came to the sword fairy of the divine power universe, so that the thoughts of Jian Wushuang gradually calmed down. Chapter 4674. In the past millions of years, all the seemingly unruly things seem to have developed in one direction. Since in the extreme sea star field, from the mouth of the snake god, I heard that the top of the universe is not an ancestor, but also encountered an ancestor who surpassed the ancestor and a bitter emperor of the same strength. The two of them could never belong to the divine universe or the imaginary universe, but they seemed to be working hard for a goal. In the land of sorrow and hunger, the old man who stopped acting as the guide, the strange mud tires of Chitting, the Xuani known to the emperor, are as unknown as the mist. Jian Mushuang desperately wants to know an answer. He feels he is enveloped by a larger cloud. After a year of silence, he walked out of the Yunxiao palace and into the sea of clouds behind the palace. Lao Zun's thin body still sits and fishes in the sea of clouds. Since Jian Wushuang has been fishing for hundreds of thousands of years, it seems that the unrequited old venerable father has begun to have a hobby of fishing. A wireless jade fishing rod was thrown into the sea of clouds, and Jian Wushuang's figure then sat down next to Lao Zun. "How many fish have you caught?" "I haven't caught a tail yet." It's no wonder that these fish have been caught by us for hundreds of thousands of years, and we have long been spiritually aware that we can't eat hooks. Jian Wushuang began to tell Lao Zun how he had been fishing for so many years. Lao Zun's calm face also gradually got a smile. His subtle smile has only been revealed to two people for millions of years. One is Sword Wushuang, and the other is naive. At the end, Lao Zun looked at Jian Wushuang and smiled. "Do you have many questions to ask me?" Jian Wushuang scratched his head. "Yes, there are some problems, but I don't know where to start." "Then let me answer you one by one," Lao Zun said quietly. "I originally wanted to wait for you to grow up slowly before telling you everything you want to know. I thought that the arrival of that day would be it's been a long time, but it was so fast." "Muzu, do you know Dianhuan?" Jian Wushuang thought about it a little, and then from being dragged into the chaotic flow of time and space by the false god, to entering the great realm of Fang Xuanqi, everything that happened in the process was told to Lao Zun. "It turns out that I didn't expect you to get in there." Lao Zun's tone was stable. The so-called Dian Huan, the simplest and clearest explanation, is the ultimate of the avenue, the original of everything. At the same time, it is only a general term. In the world of Dian, fairy world, realm, everything and everything are coexisting. Sword Wushuang moved intentionally and asked, "What kind of existence does that ancestor class belong to in Dian?" Lao Zun looked at him and smiled slightly. "Very common." Jian Wushuang was shocked. He knew that Lao Zun wouldn't lie, but it was precisely because he didn't lie that made him feel terrible. Is already the end of an infinite universe, but it is only a very common existence in that great world. What was above that ancestor level, he could hardly imagine it. Did the sword fairy Ding Bai come here from Dianhuan? Jian Wushuang asked. Lao Zun nodded. "It should be. No one except Da Yanhuan. Even if there are other universes, no one can cause harm to you." Jian Wushuang nodded and said, "Did the emperor bite from Dianhuan?" Naturally, the kind of derivation that he used that transcended the category of divine power proved his identity. Lao Zun said, looking at Jian Wushuang at the same time, "As for me, it is an independent place with no surviving life." The presence. Jian Wushuang was a little unsure, but he didn't know how to ask. "Wushuang, do you know what the predecessor of Dianhuan was?" Jian Wushuang shook his head. "Seems to be recalling," the elder muttered. "The first predecessor of Dianhuan is actually a universe of one side, and the other is the same universe as the divine universe and the imaginary universe. Dai Yanhuan's original predecessor was called Jie, and I was in another universe called Yang. There was also a catastrophe between these two universes. Eventually, as the other side's universe was completely eradicated and eliminated, it became Dian. And the universe called Yang is the one who is finally destroyed." Listening to Lao Zun's narrative, Jian Wushuang began to feel that his brain capacity was not enough. From the universe to Dianhuan, it seemed more complicated and somewhat familiar. Why are the two universes so good that they don't die? Is it just because they destroyed the other party and promoted to Dianhuan? Jian Wushuang asked in a deep voice. Lao Zun shook his head. The factors in between are too complicated, just like today's endless war between your two universes. Jian Wushuang froze. He finally understood the feeling of déjà vu. The Holocaust battle between the Yang universe and the universe, with the demise of the Yang universe finally promoted to Dian Huan. And now the universe of divine power and the universe of imagination are not exactly like this route. He was startled and seemed to understand what he already knew. In the polar sea starfield, and Lao Zun met for the first time, and set the 3 conditions. The first condition is to completely destroy the hostile universe without leaving any creatures. If the only condition for the promotion from the universe to Dianhuan is to completely destroy the hostile universe, is it not the only way for the universe to be promoted to Dianhuan if the condition of promise to the Lord? Jian Wushuang was silent for a long time. He looked at Lao Zun and said, Lao Zun, as long as the void universe is destroyed, will the divine universe be promoted to Dianhuan? No, this is the ultimate way, and cannot accommodate the second Dianhuan. Only by erasing the original Dianhuan can you be promoted. Jian Wushuang nodded and stopped talking. Old Master no longer spoke, and after a long time, he slowly said, in fact, the conditions mentioned before are just some jokes, you don't have to take it seriously. What do you say? There is a saying in the world, a gentleman is hard to chase after a horse, and I will promise to count when I come down. Jian Wushuang smiled, then pretended to inadvertently, raised his hand and patted the old gentleman's shoulder. This is an agreement between the two of us. Lao Zun shook his head and smiled slightly, and stopped talking. This dialogue in the cloud top did not last long, but the amount of information contained in it and the source of incomparable complexity almost directly raised the existing knowledge of Jian Wushuang. This finally let him know that the ultimate avenue is not the ancestor level. Tianwei still has heaven. And his master Xuani, is it possible that he came out of the original, all-round Da Yanhuan that contains all things? See the moon in the water and see the sun in the cloud. Chapter 4675. The sword fairy Ding Bai, who realized the kendo to the extreme, appeared in the supreme fairy posture. The simplest and purest kendo in one hand almost raised the sword to a completely new level. After playing against Ding Bai, Jian Wushuang not only did not suffer setbacks, but instead began to appreciate the obscure levels. His own swordsmanship has already reached the level of transformation, opening and closing, full of loneliness and arrogance. Ding Bai's sword is the most ordinary sword, but it has also reached the transformation. His one move, one collection and one release are simple and pure, as if to eat once and sleep once. Dull. But this is the most mundane trick, but it has turned into a desperate sword, pushing the sword Wushuang to death again and again. And Jian Wushuang's hard work today is to learn to gain momentum. From heaven, the sword fairy Ding Bai from Dianhuan fell asleep for 20,000 years, and Jian Wushuang was also on the Yundingshan pavilion, and spent 20,000 years of hard work. In order to have some fun in that boring way, Jian Wushuang planted a peach tree seedling in the center of the huge dojo in front of the shrine. For 20,000 years, the saplings had grown to towering giant trees, and the monsters bred in their trees were lying on the treetop on time every day to watch Jian Wushuang practice swords. One day after 20,000 years, the door of the silent shenge was opened, a plain shirt, and the pale Ding Bai slowly walked out of the shenge. He looked at Jian Wushuang, who was sitting under the peach tree with a slightly uncomfortable face, and smiled. Hey, why didn't you kill me at that time, and run here torture me all day? Sword Muzu grinned, stretched his hands to stand aside, and the real sword of Chi's spirit threw at Ding Bai. Ding Bai reached out to take it, so he made a bad voice and said, Don't you kill me while I was stunned, aren't you afraid that I will kill you now? Killed you at that time, it was invincible, I disdain, if you kill me in reverse now, it is also invincible, how can I worry? Jian Wushuang smiled. Why, don't you sinister? Ding Bai was dumb for a while, but didn't know how to refute it, so he had to scream and jumped up to the eaves of the divine pavilion with his sword, and then he fell asleep. Jian Wushuang didn't care about him anymore, he continued to sharpen his moves under the peach tree. The reason why Ding Baiyi passed away was purely because the chaotic flow of time and space unknowingly eroded his meridians, and when he came up, he fought like a chicken blood. The meridians were cut off directly for protection. With the supply of Yang Li, he just died like a crash. This guy is like looking for revenge, but because of the cold on the road, after putting down the harsh words in front of the Chiu family, he directly fell like a dead pig and fell awake. It was Jian Wushuang who met him at a loss. If he was someone else, he would have been called away. In this way, for another 1,000 years, Jian Wushuang has not been slack for a moment. Even the simplest straight cut can be practiced for centuries. During this period, Ding Baiyi, who was sleeping on the eaves of the divine pavilion, from the very beginning of impatientness, to watching the sword Wushuang practiced with boredom, began to give advice from time to time. The comprehension of kendo, Jian Wushuang obviously exceeded Ding Baiyi's expectations. Ding Baiyi also gradually realized that the crushing on him was not a crushing on kendo comprehension, but a pure realm suppression. Nature, the self-proclaimed sword fairy, also provoked the battle again. I haven't forgotten the main purpose of this visit. Are you going to take the lead and let me pick it up personally? Ding Baiyi said coldly on the side of the dojo. Jian Wushuang shrugged. I always have people in my head who want to take them, but they all died in front of me one by one. If you want, you can take it yourself. It's a big tone. Ding Baiyi sneered. Then he stepped forward and waved a branch with peach blossoms off the peach tree. Jian Wushuang's eyes narrowed, and then he stretched out his hand and pulled off a branch with peach blossoms. The mighty and mighty divine power swept away in an instant, entrenched in the sky of the whole dojo like a dragon. Ding Baiyi then released a more terrifying force, confronting Jian Wushuang. Yanli is a special energy that suppresses and contains divine and virtual powers. It only belongs to the higher rules of Dian Huan, and the emperor of the empress power is Yanli. Looking at the slightly thin white clothes, Jian Wushuang did not relax his vigilance. He practiced kendo for tens of thousands of years, but he was ready to defeat him one day. Use your own swordsmanship to face me, otherwise I can guarantee that you will not be able to hold 10 breaths in the future. Ding Baiyi said softly. Nature. Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows and smiled. Wushuang Kendo, Xingahuhai Jenny second form, river. Wushuang Kendo derives countless swordsmanship in one, and the roaring roar is like a reeling tianhe, a grand view. Rewinding tianhe up against the current, carrying endless power, dashing towards Ding Baiyi. And sword Wushuang, at the moment, standing like a majestic sword, standing in the mighty sword, holding up the peach blossom branch in his hand and falling straight. It's kind of interesting. Ding Baiyi slightly raised the corner of his mouth, but inserted the peach branch in the back of his neck with his backhand, facing the vast Jianhe river like a shock. Stepped out. Not only did the surging Jianhe not cause any damage to Ding Baiyi, but instead he took advantage of it to reach the sword without two sides. The peach branch in his hand instantly pointed to the face of Jian Wushuang. This seemingly extremely ordinary sword, if you slow down, you can see that it is no less than 100,000 shot. 100,000 shots, all counted as a sword. How crazy is the sword? Jian Wushuang's body is inclined, forced to help but can only resist. But the 100,000 swords were so powerful and terrifying that they directly dismantled his resistance and cut off the peach branches in the sword without both hands. The remaining was nearly 50,000 swords, and the unstoppable nail was nailed in front of him. Rao is the sword of Wushuang's immortal body, and he also feels the chest tightness. If it is replaced by a sword, I am afraid that there are already countless transparent holes in his body. However, Jian Wushuang didn't feel discouraged. After shockingly pushing Ding Baiyi away, he stretched out his hand and folded another peach branch, and took the lead to cut him. Belongs to the offensive of the unparalleled kendo wide open and close, one by one straight cut, all fell on the peach branch of Ding Baiyi. Like thousands of soldiers bombarded down, even Ding Baiyi felt the suffocation of chest tightness. This guy is really good. Ding Baiyi secretly wondered. Just as he was about to fight back again, the peach blossom branch suddenly broke in his hand. Jian Wushuang had no love at all, fluttered and retreated, and at the same time waved a branch to him again. Come again. Then come again. Chapter 4676. The years have passed, and Yundao Palace has been talking about kendo for 100,000 years. Peach blossoms are still there, and the little monsters of that year have already appeared. The two under the tree never seemed tired, and even the peach blossom branch above the peach tree was about to be refracted. "Don't hit it, my hair is almost gone." This sentence became Taeoxian's mantra, but it didn't seem to be of much use. Broken branches have already piled up 2 hills. One of the plain shirts, kendo changed the restrained and implicit for more than 100,000 years. Just like the ultimate sword made by the edge, every attack is extremely fierce. Another black shirt shape, his swordsmanship also changed from the opening and closing of hundreds of thousands of years ago. Just like the sword hidden in the room, every time he attacked, it became as heavy as water. They are already learning from each other. When the last sword of the black shirt body pushed the front sword of the plain shirt body, this 100,000-year theory was the last thing to do. "Don't fight anymore, this seat is tired." Ding Bai stretched out a lazy waist, threw the peach blossom branch in his hand to Jian Wushuang, and lay back on the roof of Shenge. Jian Wushuang smiled slightly, and after throwing the branch to Daoxian, he also leapt to the top of the eaves. Looking at Yunhuan Yunshu in front of him, he asked, "Why did you kill me at the beginning?" Ding Bai said comfortably, "Trusted by others, it is so simple." The next sword Wushuang was even more puzzled. "I just didn't intend to enter that day Yanhuan, and before I could do anything, I planted the enemy family." Ding Bai heard the words and looked at him. "In that wild land, the little emperor's cronies, but died in your hands." Jian Wushuang just wanted to refute, suddenly thought back to something, and then stunned, "Is the few guys I killed at the time a strong force in Dianhuan?" Ding Bai pouted, "That kind of inferior cronies, it's all right to kill 100, but what happened afterwards was the key that led me to take your life. When you left Dianhuan, did you let go of a blue one?" Jian Wushuang said, "It seems that he let go of one." "Then you know that the Qinghuan is the emperor?" "You let go of the emperor." Ding Bai didn't have a good air. "I didn't know anything at the time. It was purely that she begged me for help. I didn't have anything to do with what happened next." Jian Wushuang hurriedly said, "You guys." Ding Bai shook his head helplessly, and then stopped talking. He tentatively said, "Don't you plan to kill me?" "Too lazy to kill, this seat is suddenly not interested." Ding Bai lazily said, "Again, if you kill you now, wouldn't it be invincible? Then if you don't kill me, what should you tell me when you go back? You are not afraid of what little emperor found." Ding Bai sneered disdainfully, "I only wanted to give back to his emperor's past gratitude. I said killing is killing. Who dares to refute?" Looking at the domineering side leakage, Jian Wushuang laughed aloud, "So when I have the power of a battle, let's try again." He adjusted a comfortable posture. "Even if one day, I will certainly cut you under the sword with my own hand, to use my sword. But that day, I'm afraid I will never come." Ding Bai finished his last sentence and slept. Jian Wushuang smiled slightly, swept down the pavilion, and returned to the Yunxiao Palace. After sleeping for 100 years in the Shenge, Ding Bai was ready to leave. Jian Wushuang and Lao Zun sent him to Luoju Starfield. In front of Chaos Spring, Jian Wushuang waved his hand to wipe the seal from the eyes of Chaos Spring, and the majestic eccentric energy poured out like a hole in the sky. Ding Bai, who is still a plain shirt, stands in front of the vast energy. No one spoke. Ding Bai walked forward slowly. After dozens of steps, he slowly turned his head to look at Jian Wushuang, and then walked forward. "Ding Bai!" Jian Wushuang shouted loudly, and then threw an object forward. Ding Bai reached back without catching his head. It was a peach branch. "I'll never see you again." The palm that clasped the peach blossom branch gently waved, and the back body shape disappeared into the vast energy and disappeared completely. Waving his hands to reseal the chaotic spring eyes, Jian Wushuang looked at Lao Zun. "Lao Zun, you said that Ding Bai entered the turbulent flow at that time, is it okay?" "Naturally, no mistakes can be made in his realm, at most a little uncomfortable." Lao Zun replied. Jian Wushuang breathed a sigh of relief. "I'm going to take another Shoshan again, and now I can finally calm down and settle the liquidation." Lao Zun didn't speak, and walked smoothly behind Jian Wushuang. Yunxiao Palace. At the moment, in the vast hall, only Jian Wushuang and the old statue sat side by side. On the case in front of them, he was trapped by the divine power with a dark light. That is a source of cost to the emperor, and it is also a mud tire. Old master, is there a way to destroy it? Jian Wushuang said in a deep voice. Lao Zun nodded, stretched out his palm with his hand, and stamped it on the light runes with ruinous meaning rose up, and several wisps of misty black smoke surged, and finally completely dissipated, and never left a trace. In this way, then the emperor of the blessed emperor really died out. Lao Zun nodded. Jian Wushuang was relieved, and then he raised his chin with his hand and wondered, what is it? Mud tire, what is it? Qi Ting does not hesitate to wipe out the heavenly path, and seduce thousands of monks to condense, that even the emperor also has mud tires. The mud tire, in general, is actually the obsession of the past, the practice of the world, all of my own perceptions, collectively these aspects. Lao Zun explained, and want to enter the realm of the great Yanhuan by himself. One step is to cut off the past of the world. Qi Ting wanted to enter that Yanhuan at that time? Jian Wushuang stunned. Lao Zun said, this possibility is not ruled out, but if you remove the mud tire from yourself, even if you enter the realm of Yangxian, you will also be hit hard, so he will lure so many monks to use it as his mud tire. Originally, Jian Wushuang nodded. Now both internal and external chaos are settled, and it is time to re-enter the virtual universe. The elder nodded, it'll take another 100,000 years, I need to adjust my interest rate for a while. After several days of analysis, Lao Zun withdrew from Yunxiao Palace and returned to his residence. Standing in the vast square, Jian Wushuang directly adjusted her breath. Now that the phagocytosis has disappeared even with the emperor, the imaginary universe has opened its doors completely. Jian Wushuang's last thing to do is to completely eliminate the nightmare that exists for the divine universe. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.